In the spring of 1959, Spokane, Washington was a community like many others. Quiet neighborhoods, families settling in for the evening, children playing outside without fear. But on a Friday night in early March, that safety would shatter. A 9-year-old girl would vanish while doing something as innocent as selling Girl Scout mints. 16 days later, her body would be discovered in the woods. And for the next 62 years, her killer would remain a mystery, until technology caught up with an old crime and a small community finally got the answers they had been waiting for their entire lives. This is the story of Candy Rogers, and this is how determination, community, and science finally solved one of the most haunting crimes in Spokane's history. The normal-day 9-year-old Candice Elaine Rogers, everyone called her Candy, lived with her family in an apartment above a grocery store in Spokane's West Central neighborhood. It was March 6, 1959. Just an ordinary Friday evening, Candy had big dreams that night. She wasn't thinking about homework or playing with friends. She was thinking about Campfire Girls. She wanted to raise money for the organization, and she had the perfect plan. Sell campfire mints door to door through the neighborhood. As darkness set in and the sun slipped below the horizon, they waited for Candy to come home. Minutes turned into an hour turned into concern, and concern turned into dread when Candy still hadn't returned. Her family did the only thing they could do. They called the police. What happened next would become the largest search operation Spokane had ever seen. Within 24 hours, the entire community mobilized. Police officers, civilians, local Air Force servicemen, they came on motorcycles, on foot, in cars, on horseback, and by helicopter. Over 1,200 searchers descended on the neighborhoods around West Central. A command post was established at what is now the intersection of Pettit Drive and the T.J. Minack Bridge. And everyone was looking for one little girl, but they had so little to go on. Then scattered along Pettit Drive, known in Spokane today as Doomsday Hill, investigators found something. Boxes of campfire mints, the same mints Candy had been selling. They were strewn across the pavement as if someone had scattered them from a moving vehicle, heading north away from the neighborhood where she lived. It was the only clue, the only indication that anyone had found of where Candy had gone. The search continued day after day. The Air Force brought in helicopters with crews who could search from above, getting a bird's-eye view of the wooded areas surrounding Spokane. They had hope. The community had hope. Surely a child this young couldn't stay hidden for long. Surely they would find her alive. But on March 7, 1959, the day after Candy disappeared, something tragic happened that would compound the community's grief. A U.S. Air Force Sikorsky H-19 helicopter was conducting search operations over the Spokane River when it struck high-tension power lines. The aircraft crashed into the water below. 3 servicemen were killed in the crash. Airman Marlis D. Ray SSGT William A. McDonald and Lieutenant Kenneth G. Foddick, 2 crew members, survived. But the community was now mourning both the missing girl and the men who had died trying to find her. The search continued anyway, determined, relentless. On March 21, 1959, 2 airmen from Fairchild Air Force Base were out hunting in a wooded area off Old Trails Road, about 7 miles from Candy's house. As they moved through the forest, they made a discovery that would change everything. A pair of little girls' shoes, sitting neatly on the ground. They didn't know if the shoes belonged to Candy, but something told them they should report what they'd found. When they mentioned it back at the base, other airmen realized this could be significant. They reported it to police. As daylight broke the next morning, a search party descended on the wooded area where the shoes had been found. They didn't have to search for long. Within minutes, they found her. Buried under a shallow layer of brush and pine needles, they discovered the body of Candy Rogers. She had been raped. She had been strangled. She had been murdered. The news hit the Spokane community like a bomb. The optimism that had defined the first 16 days of searching evaporated instantly. What had started as hope turned into horror. The city that had united to find Candy alive now had to grieve her death, and they had no idea who had taken her from them.
This is a violent crime against a small child that is hard to hear.
The task force, the Spokane Police Department, didn't hesitate. Within 24 hours of Candi's disappearance, the department had formed one of the largest task forces in the department's history. They knew what they were looking for. A predator, a man with violent impulses, a killer who preyed on the vulnerable. In 1959, there was no registered sex offender program. There was no database of known predators to cross-reference. But detectives did what they could. They reached out to individuals with similar criminal histories. They questioned suspicious individuals. They developed suspects. They worked tirelessly, driven by the knowledge that somewhere in Spokane, a man was living a normal life while everyone else grieved. But nothing stuck. No confession came. No piece of evidence led them to an arrest. One by one, their suspects were cleared. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. The case file grew. It became the largest case file in the Spokane Police Department's history. And still, they had no answers. New detectives inherited the case from retiring investigators. And those retiring investigators made impassioned pleas to their successors. "Don't stop looking," they said. "Don't forget Candy Rogers. Someone knows what happened to her. Don't let the trail go completely cold." The burden was passed from one generation to the next. A relay race where the baton was Candy's memory. A murder that was never officially closed, never truly cold, never forgotten. But without new evidence, without new leads, they remained stuck. The technology problem. Here's the thing about 1959. The world of forensic science was virtually unrecognizable compared to today. DNA as a scientific concept was understood by scientists, but actually using DNA to solve crimes? That was decades away. No detective in 1959 could have imagined that 60 years later, a genetic profile extracted from semen would finally reveal the killer's identity. The detectives in 1959 did something remarkable. They preserved the evidence. They collected items from Candy's body with meticulous care, her clothing, biological material. Everything was documented, cataloged, and stored carefully. The chain of custody was maintained. They did this without knowing, without any guarantee that it would matter, but they did it anyway. It's a testament to their diligence. They were investigating in the dark, but they were doing it right. In the community of Spokane, it remained a defining tragedy. Parents warned their children about strangers. Families passed down the story of the little girl in the woods. And detectives, tired, frustrated, but determined, continued to work.
It really changed the way Spokane worked back then, and how children were allowed to roam free or not.
In the early 2000s, a new lead emerged. Detectives had identified a promising suspect, Hugh Bion Morse. Morse was a serial killer, a predator known to target young girls. He was in the Spokane area at the time of Candy's murder. His method of operation seemed to fit the profile. For a moment, it seemed like they might finally have their answer. But when detectives submitted the DNA evidence for testing against Hugh Bion Morse, the results came back negative. The DNA didn't match, Morse was ruled out, and the mystery remained. The turning point, in 2001, a detective named Mindy Connolly had an idea. She understood something that had been gnawing at the department for years. Advances in forensic science were moving faster than cold case investigations. What if they submitted Candy's clothing to a modern lab? What if they extracted DNA and submitted it to the national database? What if technology could do what traditional detective work could not? Mindy Connolly pushed for it. She convinced the department, and Candy's clothing was sent to the laboratory. Forensic scientists got to work. They found semen in Candy's underwear. They extracted the biological material with precision. They developed a complete DNA profile. The profile was uploaded into CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, the FBI's national DNA database that compared genetic profiles across law enforcement agencies and convicted offenders. They waited for a match. They held their breath, hoping that after all these years, The national database would finally connect Candy's case to her killer, but the database returned no matches. The killer's DNA was not in the system. He had never been convicted of a felony. He had never submitted his DNA, and once again, the investigation hit a wall. For the next 15 years, the case remained officially unsolved. Detectives continued to work it. They continued to develop leads. They continued to question persons of interest, submitting their DNA for comparison. But the killer's identity remained a mystery. Decades had passed. Generations of detectives had worked the case, and still no answer. And then in 2017 and 2018, everything changed. Forensic genetic genealogy. By 2018, a new technology had emerged and captured the attention of law enforcement agencies across the country. Forensic genetic genealogy. It sounds complex, and in many ways it is. But the concept is simple. If you have DNA from a crime scene, you can submit it to genealogy databases. Instead of just searching for exact matches in law enforcement databases, you can use family connections. You can build a family tree from the DNA. You can narrow down the possibilities from thousands to maybe 3 suspects, 3 brothers, 3 chances to find your killer. The Spokane Police Department had been watching this technology solve some of the country's most famous cold cases. The Golden State Killer, cases that had gone unsolved for decades. And they immediately asked themselves, could forensic genetic genealogy solve Candy Rogers? In 2018, they resubmitted Candy's evidence to the crime lab for evaluation using this new technique. The case was assigned to Brittany Wright, a forensic scientist with the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory Division. What she was about to uncover would finally bring answers to a community that had been waiting for 62 years. The semen specimen collected from Candy's clothing was inputted into a genealogy database. The results came back. There was a possible match, and that match narrowed the possibilities down to 3 brothers. One of those 3 brothers was John Ray Hoff. Hoff was the only one of the 3 brothers who had offspring. He had a daughter. And that daughter, when detectives contacted her and explained what they were investigating, immediately understood the gravity of what was happening. She dropped everything and met with detectives. She gave them a DNA sample without hesitation. The results were shocking in their certainty. The DNA from John Ray Hoff's daughter was 2.9 million times more likely to be related to the recovered specimen than the general population. In other words, the math didn't lie. Somewhere in John Ray Hoff's family line was the man who had killed Candy Rogers. And the most likely person was John Ray Hoff himself. The verification but detectives faced a profound question. How certain is certain enough? John Ray Hoff was dead. He had died by suicide in 1970. 11 years after he murdered Candy Rogers, there would be no trial. There would be no adversarial process where lawyers argued evidence back and forth. There would be no jury deliberation. The only thing that would prove who had killed Candy was this investigation. And detectives decided they had an obligation to be absolutely certain.
This is my personal opinion, and ultimately I'm wrong, but I have a concern that there is a brother out there that genealogy did not see, or that there is a paternity issue with Kathy. So, the most certain way to eliminate that concern is a one-to-one comparison with the actual suspect.
So they did something dramatic. They obtained a warrant to exhume the body of John Ray Hoff. They collected DNA samples directly from his remains, and they sent those samples to the lab for analysis. The results left no room for doubt. The DNA found on Candy Rogers' clothing matched John Ray Hoff with a probability threshold of 25 quintillion-to-1. That's 25 followed by 18 zeros. In practical terms, it means this is him, beyond any reasonable doubt, beyond any mathematical probability. This is the man who murdered Candy Rogers, who was John Ray Hoff. John Ray Hoff was 20 years old when he killed Candy Rogers. He had grown up in Spokane, in the West Central neighborhood, just about a mile from where Candy lived. He knew the area. He knew the streets. He knew the children playing in those streets. He enlisted in the Army at 17. He was stationed at missile sites surrounding Fairchild Air Force Base. And in the chaos of searching for Candy Rogers, while airmen were scanning the skies and searchers were combing through the woods, John Ray Hoff was watching. He was living his normal life while a community tore itself apart, looking for a little girl he had murdered. But Hoff had violent impulses that he couldn't control. In 1961, 2 years after he murdered Candy, Hoff committed another brutal crime. He accosted a female victim, forcibly removed her clothes, tied her up using her own garments, and strangled her. The victim survived. She lived to testify against him. And Hoff was convicted of assault in the second degree with intent to rob. He spent 6 months in jail for the attack. Because of that conviction, Hoff was declared a deserter from the Army and dishonorably discharged. He worked as a door-to-door salesman after that. He worked at a lumber yard. He lived a life knowing what he had done to Candy Rogers, knowing that no one had ever pinned the crime on him. And then, in 1970, at the age of 31, John Ray Hoff took his own life.
Hoff died by suicide in 1970, and Kathy says she lived most of her life thinking it was due to depression.
And now I think, no, he was evil. He was evil, and it was an escape.
The community's grief when police announced that they had solved Candy Rogers' murder. The Spokane community experienced something complex. There was relief. There was validation. There was finally an answer to the question that had haunted them for 6 decades. But there was also pain. Because John Ray Hoff was already dead, he would never stand trial. He would never face judgment. He would never have to answer for what he had done. Sergeant Zach Stormont, speaking about the years of investigation, said something that captures the depth of the commitment. This isn't measured in hours. This is measured in careers. Generations of detectives had worked on Candy's case. Mindy Connolly, who pushed for DNA testing in 2001. Brittany Wright, the forensic scientist who helped solve it using genetic genealogy. Officers who had retired still hoping for answers. Officers just starting their careers carrying forward the mission. The case resonated with the department and the community for decades. It wasn't just another file. It was personal. It was about a little girl who had been stolen from them. It was about a community that deserved answers. The legacy Candy Rogers' murder was solved because of 3 things coming together at the right moment. The determination of a community that refused to forget. The evolution of technology that made the impossible possible. And the perseverance of generations of detectives who refused to give up, even when they had no leads to follow. In 1959, those detectives did something remarkable. They preserved evidence without knowing that DNA would one day solve the case. They worked tirelessly on a case with no clear path forward. They passed the torch to the next generation and begged them not to stop. 62 years later, that investment paid off. Brittany Wright, the forensic scientist whose work helped bring closure to Candy's case, grew up in Spokane hearing her parents tell her about the little girl who had been murdered. She remembers them warning her about strangers. She remembers Candy Rogers being a part of her household, even 30 to 40 years after the crime had occurred. And then, years later, she found herself working on that very case. She found herself being the person who helped solve the mystery that had defined her childhood. On March 6, 1959, Candy Rogers left her apartment to sell campfire mints. She never came home. On March 21, 1959, body was found in the woods 7 miles from her house. For 62 years, the community of Spokane lived with that wound open. But on November 20th, 2021, police announced that they had finally found their answer. They had finally identified the man who had taken Candy from them.
I would like to thank the Spokane community. I would like to simultaneously apologize that it took us this long to bring this case to completion.
And while that man was long dead, while he would never face trial or judgment, the truth had finally come to light. Candy Rogers was murdered by John Ray Hoff, and now finally Spokane knew. The story of Candy Rogers is about more than just a cold case solved. It's about a community that refused to forget. It's about detectives who passed the torch from generation to generation, each one saying, "Keep looking, don't give up." It's about technology advancing to a point where justice, even delayed by 6 decades, is still possible. It's about a 9-year-old girl named Candy who deserved so much more than what she got, who deserved to grow up, to graduate high school, to fall in love, to have a life. But because of the dedication of the people around her, her story didn't end in the woods where she was found. Her story ended with answers, with justice, with a community finally knowing who had taken her from them. Candy Rogers' name will not be forgotten. Her case will not be forgotten. And the lesson it teaches us, that technology and determination and community can solve even the oldest crimes, will remind us for generations to come that justice, no matter how long it takes, is always possible.
Very, very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly, and that he took her mom's life, really, took her dad's life. He took more lives than one.
She was an only child, her mom was an only child, and so that's really sad that they passed away with not knowing who had taken their granddaughter and daughter's life.